As I look back on my spiritual journey, one of the places that I continually come back to is the book of Psalms. I often intersperse my regular Bible reading with reading through and journaling through the Psalms. You see, the Psalms are kind of like the hymn book of the Bible. They were simply songs written by the nation of Israel, many by King David or Asaph, one of the choir directors, and they were songs of praise to God. But one of the things that the Psalms have done for me is they keep me honest. I think for me, growing up in the church, it was easy to put on a front, to go through the motions of Christianity, and it's the Psalms that are brutally honest with God. One of the Psalms that I continually come back to is Psalm 73. Mary and I have mentioned this psalm on our vlogging channel often because it's a psalm that wrestles with some of the hard questions of faith. The psalm starts out and it makes one of those statements that you'd hear in a worship service at a church. Truly, God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. It reminds me of that old call and response you sometimes hear in churches. God is good all the time. All the time, God is good. And the psalmist is just saying, this is what we sing, this is what we say at church, this is what I'm supposed to believe, that God is good. But then he says, but as for me, I have nearly stumbled. My feet have nearly slipped. Because when I look at the arrogant, when I look at the lives of the wicked, and he goes on to say, I see the wicked prospering and the righteous suffering. If you're human, you've probably thought those same things. And in the church, it's sometimes hard to be honest with our emotions. And the Psalms do just that. They make us get honest with God. You see, Psalm 73 takes us on a journey of professing truly God is good, but as for me, I question God's goodness. And sometimes we talk about faith like it's having all the answers, but faith isn't having all the answers. You see, there's a lot of questions in this life that we don't have answers to. God simply hasn't answered all of the questions. But what God has given us is He's given us Himself. And as the psalmist reflects on the prosperity of the wicked, and he goes on and on about how they go on and live life as if nothing matters, as if when they die, that's that, and it's all about themselves. If I admitted, he says, if I went on and told my generation that I have these struggles, that I have these questions, I would be an outcast, I would be secluded, and some of us feel like that in the church. We feel like if we ask the questions, those hard questions about God's goodness and His and whether and how the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper, and how all this works, and why suffering, why me? We're afraid to ask these questions, and the psalmist says the very same thing. If I said these things, I would have betrayed my brothers. I would have betrayed my generation. But the Psalms teach us that we have to be honest with our questions to God. We don't hold those questions like a dagger before God, putting Him on trial, but we need to ask Him these questions. And the Psalms teach us to pray when we have questions, when we have doubts, when we have struggles. And the psalmist says, but then I went into the sanctuary of God. I went before God's presence, and this is what he says, then I discerned their end. You see, it's easy to look at the wicked prospering and the righteous suffering and saying that's not fair. But we have to look beyond here and now and look to the end of our lives and what matters then. And the psalmist, by the end of the psalm, comes to the place of saying, you know what? When it comes to the goodness of God, he discovers that the good life is not found in prosperity, but it's found in proximity to God. The good life is not found in prosperity, but in proximity to God. And sometimes we need just to recalibrate, to reset our focus and realize that the good life is not about having an easy life. God doesn't promise us that life's going to be easy, but he promises us himself. And the psalmist says in Psalm 73, but for me, it is good to be near God. He says, my flesh and my heart may fail, but God remains the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Sometimes we just need to be recalibrated. We need to come back into the sanctuary of God, to come face down before him and realize what the good life is really all about. When we start comparing ourselves with others, when we look at the wicked and their prosperity, yes, life seems unfair, and life is unfair. But this is true. Truly, God is good to his people. And the good life isn't found in prosperity, but it's found in proximity to God. And so maybe you're having struggles or questions that as you look at others around you who might be prospering, and you have, maybe you're suffering, you're walking through an illness or a struggle, and you have doubts or questions, be honest with those. The Psalms teach us to be honest with God. But at the end of the day, we have to come face down before him and let our hearts be recalibrated, let our minds be refocused, and let us realize that the good life is not found in prosperity, but in proximity to God. So that we can say with the psalmist, my flesh and my heart may fail, but God is my strength and my portion forever.